We hope you're having a good conference. So it's almost into day 2. So JP just gave us a great talk before about some design work for Android Wear. And so now what we're going to talk about is about making your apps work on the always-on screen support that's available on Android Wear. So it's a really cool feature where your screen is always operating, so to show you information. So we're going to give a little talk about this today. So we've got JP here.
So I did give a little talk just right before about how to make your watch face interactive. And when I showed that you can actually have an always-on mode for the watch faces. As Wayne mentioned, we can do that for your apps as well. And I'm a designer at the Android Wear team.
So I'm Wayne Piekarski, and I'm a developer advocate, and I work on Android Wear plus a bunch of other different products. And so we're going to give a little talk today about sort of some of the best design principles for working with the always-on screen. And there's our contact details if you want to follow us on Google+ or Twitter. And then also we have an Android Wear developers group on Google+ that you can also check out as well. But anyway, let's get started with our talk. And so I'll pass it off to JP.
So when you look at this screen here, when you think about like an always-on screen, you think about LCDs. So they're very low battery, they last forever, but the problem with them is that you actually have to think about all the information that you want to pack in that screen beforehand, right? So you have to make like a lot of choices before you decide what to put in there. And once they're in there, you can't change them anymore. So they're very power efficient. You know that they're going to work for a long time. But if you need any other kind of information, you're not going to have it because it's not going to change. It's not very flexible. So with Android Wear, we are the first smartwatch that allows you to have the flexibility of like color LCDs, color displays, that we can update the pixels anytime with the always-on functionality as well that pretty much mimics what happens on an LCD with much more flexibility. You don't have to design beforehand. So basically, you can have information that's there all the time in a low-power fashion, saving you battery and actually not disconnecting the user from the experiences that they're going through. So as an example, here you're looking at the watch face. I don't know if you're familiar with Android watch faces. We've been having these experiences for watch faces since the beginning, just to save power. So basically, you have your time, and then it switches to low power mode. You remove all the pixels, like the color pixels, and try to just display the information that you need with as little pixels as possible. Let's say 5% of the pixels that you need, just using black and white. But you don't need to show just time. You can also get your next notification. You look at notification, oh, Jeff sent me a notification plans for tonight. And then if you want to know more, you just tap on the watch face, and then it brings up to full power, and you can interact with it. And this can apply for different kinds of notifications, different kinds of experiences, like playing music or going through navigation directions. As an example, like for micro apps, let's say you're actually you have an app from your airline, and then you're going through your airport, and you have your QR code. Originally in Android Wear, when we launched, every time that you had a micro app open, when the display powered down, you would just close the micro app. And you're in an airport, a situation like this, your QR code is right there in front of you, all of a sudden it's not there anymore. But now, you can just program your app to actually use always-on mode, and then it just dims the display, goes to low power, and it stays there. So the activity is just going to stay there until you actually interact with it. So you don't lose, you just keep the same thread. Think about like when you're like in a commute in a city. You're looking at what's going to be your next stop, like when of your next train's coming. And then if that information is very important and you lose it at the right time, what's the use of it, right? So you can actually switch that to also use low power mode as well. Another example is if you're going to a grocery store and you're trying to look for things to buy. If you're looking at a list, you know like what's going to come next, what's going to come before. But if the list disappears, what's the use of it again, right? So here's an example. I'm going to buy chocolate, and I just enter low power mode, and the developer just decided to just show the time there to actually even add more information. So you keep the information of the app, but you also add the information of the watch face as well. Now I'm going to pass it on to Wayne, who's going to tell you how to build this.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so you've seen some of the compelling use cases of why always on is so awesome. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to take your existing Android Wear app and retrofit it to activate this always on mode. So the first thing you got to do is you need to tweak your build.gradle file. So now if you're building an Android Wear app, you probably have these things already. So if you look, we've got the wearable support library and we have Google Play services. So typically you're going to have that if you're doing data layer or anything like that. And you're going to have the support library if you're using any of the little widgets that are provided. If you don't have it, add this support to it. Now, one trick with always on mode is you've got to have this provided section in the middle there. That was added as part of the always on support. So make sure you put that in, otherwise you'll have link problems later on. So this is pretty simple. I said most of you already got it. And one final thing is there's a plus symbol in the top right. So the plus symbol is a Gradle thing that means grab the latest version. Now you can also specify a specific version like 8.3. You can choose which one is more appropriate. The catch with pluses is that the version might change in the future and it might break something, so you can actually fix the version in. And I think the current version of Wearable Support Library is 1.3. But anyway, so you make that little change there. And the next thing you need to do is you tweak your Android Manifest.xml file. Once again, pretty simple. You need to request wake lock permissions. That's because due to the way that the always on mode feature runs, you have to have the ability to grab a wake lock, so you add that in as well. And then the next thing is you need to specify in the manifest that you're using this wearable library, and you need to specify this in the manifest as well. If you leave these features out, the support won't work, so make sure you put that in. So we've added the build tools changes necessary. Now we're going to show you how to make the little tweaks to the code to put this on. So your code is already going to be extending a wearable activity, so you've probably already got this, but you can see here we've got our activity, it extends wearable activity. There are some people who have wearable apps that don't extend wearable activity. You'll have to rejig your app to do that. Most people are doing that. In your onCreate method, which you already have as well, you need to make a one-line call to set ambient enabled. That tells the Android Wear framework that your app is aware of always-on mode support. If you don't put that in, it won't do the necessary calls to your app, and if you let the screen idle too long, your app will be dismissed just like before. So very important you put that in. Next, in your activity, you need to declare a method called onEnterAmbient. So the framework will call onEnterAmbient when it detects that the screen is about to, you can see here my watch is active, and then eventually it goes dark. It's entering ambient mode when it goes dark at that point. So it calls your onEnterAmbient method. You need to call super onEnterAmbient to call the default version, and then you need to do things that reduce what's being shown on the display. So for example, in this code snippet here, you can see that we're taking the background color and we're setting it probably to black. So the M ambient BG color, we've used that. So this is reducing what's shown on the display, and then we leave our method and then we're done. Now you can see here, we have a fragment. We've passed this on to that to also recolor that as well. So that's it. So we're just tweaking the display, and then our app continues to run, and that's it. Next step, onExitAmbient. This method is called when the screen is becoming active again. So we're entering interactive mode. We want to enable full color, full interactivity, things like that. You can see that we're setting the background color back to the active color there. Basically the same code, but just done in reverse. So those are the two changes there. Now, this takes care of going in the transition states, but what it doesn't take care of is how we go about refreshing the screen. So refreshing the screen is really important. Now, what you don't want to do is be in ambient mode, but your app is once a second trying to refresh the screen. That's a bad idea because refreshing the screen is expensive, the CPU has to wake up, the display uses power to refresh itself. When it's in this low power state, the screen needs to be kept static and not changing, and with as little pixels as possible illuminated. So we have this onUpdateAmbient method, which is called by the framework once per minute. It's an opportunity for your app to refresh itself and maybe draw something like a clock on your application. So if you've got your shopping list, it would be kind of sad if you've got your shopping list, but it's like, well, what's the actual time right now? So typically apps that run in ambient mode should have a little clock somewhere that shows the current time as well. So onUpdateAmbient is a method that gives you the opportunity to refresh this clock once a minute and then refresh the display. as I said, you don't want to do this very often because it wastes a lot of power. So always, when you're developing an Android Wear app, think about the user's battery and the impact it's going to have on them. Because if your app's doing all this stuff, it's going to make the battery performance terrible over the end of the day. So you're given this call. Don't do too much work in it. So update your clock, but don't do any heavy computations because that's going to waste CPU time as well. You just want to get in and out. And all we're doing here is we're just saying, okay, we've gotten our call, invalidate the view, and it's just going to refresh it quickly, and that's it. So there's no big amount of work being done here. Now, it is possible to update the screen more often if it's super important for you. So for example, the stopwatch app that comes with Android Wear has the ability to refresh the screen a bit more often because typically if you're timing something, you want to see it updating more often. So you have the ability to use the alarm manager to request a real-time clock that'll pull the CPU out of a sleep state, but you can't use things like handlers. They're actually, they're not allowed to work when you're in ambient mode. So generally, try, if you're doing some work where you're like, oh, I'll just use this hack to try to make the CPU wake up and refresh the screen, you're probably doing something wrong. It's a bad idea to try to work around the framework. If it's trying to make you sleep, you should sleep because otherwise you're wasting power. So if an oncoming, there are data layer connections between your phone and your watch. If a message comes into your watch, your app will be given the opportunity to handle that message. So the data API.addListener calls, they will fire and you'll have the ability to refresh the screen if something interesting happens. But don't refresh the screen for no reason. Refresh it only on demand. And then when you're using the alarm manager, we have something like the 10-second rule. Don't try to do it too often, but try to keep it to within something like 10 seconds. And when you're using the alarm manager as well, make sure that you use the flag update current, and also it's best practice to implement single instance launch mode. We have a code lab that shows you how to do some of this stuff. So if you come over to the code lab room next door, or if you go online to the code labs, you can see we have a sample that sort of shows the bits and pieces about how to go about implementing this and how to deal with some of these issues. So now that we've gone through some of the code for it, I'm now going to hand it back to JP, and he's going to talk more about some of the design best practices that you need to take into consideration when using always-on mode.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wayne. So basically, when you design watch faces, we should actually, or apps, you should think about like the overall design principles that we actually have as guidelines in our wearable website design guidelines. So when you do something for Android Wear, you should make apps glanceable, actionable, relevant, right? So try to focus only on the essentials. And when you switch from the normal mode to ambient mode to always on, you should even focus more on the essentials because it's not interactive, why would you show a button there? So make sure like that you degrade gracefully from the active experience to the ambient experience. So here are a couple principles. Use black and white. Black and white doesn't need a lot of power. You can remove all the color pixels and just focus on black and white. And just, the guidance is that you turn off 95% of the pixels. You're going to save a lot of power. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think displays are the #1 consumption of power in Android Wear, right?
It's one of them, yeah. It's huge.
It's huge. So you can save a lot of power by just removing color and going black and white. Display relevant time units. So Wayne talked about the example of the stopwatch. And the framework makes sure that your app's not going to wake up, but don't try to circumvent the framework. For example, I'm using like the ultra-precise stopwatch. Let's say you want to have a stopwatch for Formula 1 cars that you have to measure as like a milliseconds. That's probably not a good idea because what's the point of going in ambient mode if you cannot update every millisecond? So you rather not just use ambient mode if you want to actually update very often. Remove any button, any kind of interactive functionality because it's actually going to confuse users because actually the display is turned off and the touch screen is turned off. You're only going to see the information that is in low power mode. You're going to have to actually wake up the display, go to active mode to interact with it. So if you put a button there, users are going to tap on it and nothing's going to happen. You're going to need 2 taps to actually make it happen. Remove any sensitive content. So for example, let's say you have a messaging application, someone sends you a private message and it switches to low power mode and you don't even know that it's actually off. And like your information is going to be there. Just be conscientious of for users' privacy. If you want to add a clock, I think it's something that really helps. The example that we show with the shopping list and Wayne mentioned as well is you have the advantage to actually show two things at the same time. And time is always something that's useful for people. So like if you have the space and the UI allows for it, just show a little time. Like you have an example there. We kept the little clock pill on the top. Other examples of best practices includes to be efficient with interactive and ambient, right? So don't try to just add more functionality in ambient because it's not going to be useful, right? Because you can't interact with it. So just remove the stuff that you actually need. Remove the stuff that you actually don't need. I'm sorry. That sounded confusing. Remove the stuff that you actually don't need and just leave the stuff that's relevant for that use case, right? In the case of the QR code, you just leave the QR code. It is the cue that you actually need to just touch and turn on the active mode to actually use it. Choose the right approach for the updates. So like going back to the timer example, if your timer is like 1 hour, you probably don't need to update every 10 seconds. So maybe every minute's okay. You don't have to say, oh, I need to know that I have like 45 minutes and 37 seconds left for my timer. It's probably not so useful. Maybe when you get down to the minute, you start thinking of a more precise update time. But remember that every time you update more often, you're going to need more power. And last, make sure that you test it on your wrist. As a designer for Android Wear, like sometimes I just design something on the screen and I say, oh, that's awesome. And then I put it on my wrist, I look at it, it's like, no, that's not awesome. So basically, like, design your experiences, walk around, go outside, see if the ambient mode also works outside. Can you read it? Does it make sense? So there's like tools available out there, like Android Design Preview, where you can see mocks on the display, so you know how it looks like. And that's also for developers. Don't just do everything on the emulator. Test it on the watch and make sure that it works as well. All right, so as Wayne mentioned, we're going to have a code lab in the code lab room from 2 to 4. I'm going to be there to answer questions about interactive watch faces and always-on mode from a user experience perspective. And we have interactive watch face samples on our GitHub repository. And just join our community if you have more questions.
Yeah, we're going to have a whole bunch of people in the room next door from the Android Wear team. I'm going to be there, JP will be there, a few other people. So if you've got questions about it, feel free to come over and also try out the code labs that we have as well. It's a great opportunity to sit down and sort of work through some of the things we just talked about. They kind of guide you through the steps, and it's really easy. And if you can't make it to those sessions, remember we've got our Android Wear developers group on G+, so it's g.co Android Wear Dev. Feel free to join that. And we have like 20,000 people there who, you can post questions and someone like me or other people will answer them, and we have discussions about things. We have blog posts that go out, so there's a lot of really cool information. So make sure you follow that group and follow us on Google+ and Twitter. And otherwise, that's about it. So thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you. Any questions? Did you have one back there? No? One other thing also is that the samples are available in Android Studio. And Android Studio has this great sample feature that some people haven't heard of, where you just go new import sample, you type the name and it imports it straight out of GitHub and checks it out. And you can hit the build button, and within like 30 seconds you're building it. It's on your phone and your watch. So it's definitely a really cool thing that a lot of people don't know about. So it's kind of nice. Question?
Yes, so you recommend to show the clock on the ambient mode?
Yeah.
I've noticed like every watch face I install, I have to set like 24-hour time or month day or day month. Is there a global setting available in Android Wear where I can just say, as an application developer, just show it how the user is usually seeing it?
I think Android Wear does locales correctly, but if the developer of the app doesn't draw the clock correctly, like so if, for example, if the app developer says retrieve the number of hours as an integer and then just draw it, there's no way the locale support can override it. But if you actually use Java correctly, you can actually say, give me this value in the correctly formatted time for this person.
So it will just use the phone locale?
Yeah, if it's done correctly. But the problem is a lot of people probably aren't doing it right. And so their app insists on having checkboxes to control the 24-hour versus...
watch face I've seen requires that. And it's
yeah, I mean, because there are calls in the API of Android where if you say, take this time and render it as a string for me, and it will do it correctly based on the locale you're in, but if they're not doing it right. So it's kind of a bug in the implementation of each one. Unfortunately, you'd have to contact the developer and say, hey, you didn't do this locale stuff right. But yeah, the watch can't override it if you're not using the API correctly, unfortunately. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yep. Yep. All right, so the question was, there was a slide where the mock-up showed the clock moving during one of the slides, and what was the deal with that? So let's see if we can find that. Is that this one?
Yeah, it's right in the beginning of the presentation.
Oops.
It's probably the second slide. This one, yeah.
What's the difference?
Go back one. Yeah, exactly.
Ah, that one.
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's a feature of watch faces. So
Yeah.
in the watch face API, a watch face has the ability to ask the framework, hey, what cards have popped up and how high are they up on the screen? So you have the ability to resize your content or shift it around or whatever you want to do. Mm-hmm. So if you have an analog watch face, you could shrink it so that it fits. So there is as part of the watch face framework, it does have the ability to query that. Mm-hmm. Now, not all watch faces do it. If you've got a clock that's very at the top anyway, you don't need to do anything. But if you have some kind of watch face where for some reason you want to have everything at the bottom, it might be good to resize it, but you have full control over that.
Yeah, as he said, there's some watch faces that do a really good job at that. They actually scale very nicely and neatly, and you work in apps devices. But if you just provide enough safe area, you don't have to deal with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, otherwise, as I said, we've got office hours starting now at 2 o'clock in the Code Lab room. So please come by and have a chat with us and try it all out. And otherwise, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good conference.